Hello, everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's fourth space. And thank you so much for joining us for today's event, part of Open Access Week here at Concordia. Today's event titled Catalyzing Open Science, Charting the Path Forward at Concordia University. And to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, located on unceded Indigenous lands in Chichage, Montreal. And here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that examine research, questions, and projects that are in development here across the university. And just to let you know, we're running this event as a live stream meeting. So welcome comments, questions, anything via the chat on Zoom if you're online. Those of you in the space, of course, if you'd like to participate, we'll get you some microphones for questions. But with that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Andrea Sander-Montant. Andrea.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here at the Catalyzing Open Science event. My name is Andrea Sander-Montant. I am a PhD candidate at the Infant Research Lab at Concordia, and I've been involved with the Open Science Working Group since its inception a year ago, but I've been interested and advocating for open science since my start at Concordia 4 years ago. Today, I have the distinct pleasure to preside over this event, which will kick off with an interview to Dr. Nicolás Alessandroni. Dr. Alessandroni is an FRQ-SC postdoctoral fellow, and he works at the Concordia Infant Research Laboratory under the supervision of Dr. Krista Byers-Heinlein. He has a track record of collaborating with open science initiatives in Latin America, Europe, and North America. Together, Drs. Alessandroni and Byers-Heinlein lead the Open Science Working Group at Concordia University, which has created the report we are here to discuss today. Hi, Nicolás.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you so much for that kind intro.
Of course. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you.
Amazing. Well, first of all, I wanted to know, why is open science important to you, and sort of how did you get started with this topic, and how did the journey lead you here at Concordia?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. You know that open science is currently revolutionizing how research is done, and it's doing so by making all processes and products of research available and accessible to all. Of course, it might seem counterintuitive to talk about knowledge sharing as a revolution, right? Especially when you talk to students, undergrads, they say, oh, how come this is not the norm nowadays? But well, sadly, still publications code and data remain behind the paywall. So that's why open science is important. We need to change how science is done.
That's very interesting. So on that note, I would like to know, when was this open science group started at Concordia, and what was the reasoning behind this initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, when I joined Concordia as a Horizon postdoctoral fellow, we decided to start a series of meetings with Krista Byers-Heinlein and other key people at the university that were already interested in open science or applying open science in their own research. And we did that through the Explore Concordia website. We found these people, we met with them, and then we decided to organize this Open Science at Concordia conference last May. And it was great because that really gave us a space to discuss all things open science. And one of the conclusions was that there was no centralized space for people to converge and discuss open science. And that's when we made the call so that people could join the Open Science Working Group, and 20+ faculty, librarians, students, trainees, staff replied, and that's how we created the group.
Wow, that's so interesting. It's very much like a grassroots movement.
Oh, very much, yeah.
So what has the group been doing so far since it was created a year ago?
Well, the group has been really busy. We have organized several workshops where we discussed how to push for open science at Concordia, how to make open science a reality. And one of the concrete results was a report that is now available on Spectrum, the Concordia repository, and it's available openly so everybody can download and access this report. And it's very important because it goes beyond the conceptual level and it provides concrete recommendations to foster open science.
That's very nice. So this is the report we're going to be discussing today, just to clarify.
It is, yes. So today we are going to discuss that report and come up with an action plan to move forward.
That's very nice. Could you tell us a little bit more about why the report is important and what are the steps beyond the report? What's next?
Yeah. So, you know that in the open science domain and more generally, I would say we all agree that open science is important, is key. There is no doubt anymore about the importance of open science. But what we don't have agreement yet is about how to best implement open science in each particular context, right? So Concordia is a very specific context. Other universities have their own specific context. So how do we implement open science here at the university? That's what the report aims to shed light on, right? That's why it's important.
That's great. It seems very difficult since Concordia has like so many departments in so many different areas.
You are absolutely right about that. And actually, that's one of the things that came up during our meetings with deans, vice deans, associate deans of research. It was very clear that each discipline has their own definition of open science. So they also have specific needs that need to be met. And that's one of the tasks we are trying to undertake.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Are there other challenges that you can think of? And do you think we will be able to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, so basically one of the challenges is getting everybody involved with open science. One way we did that was taking the report to administration members to discuss with them. So this was a great milestone for the working group because we learned a lot about how different institutional actors feel about open science and what's their goals related to open science implementation.
Perfect. So we're kind of like reaching to the top levels now and trying to work with everyone.
Exactly.
That's so great. I wonder, how's this project funded, and do you have a project for future funding?
Correct. So Krista Byers-Heinlein holds the Concordia University research chair in bilingualism and open science, and she has always supported all the group activities. And of course, I mentioned my Horizon postdoctoral fellowship that I held, and that indirectly helped as well because that gave me the time to focus on helping develop an open science culture. But you are totally right to point out that there is no long-term funding scheme right now. And that's one of the things we need to work on. But this is both a challenge and an opportunity for Concordia, right? So this is important, and we hope to be addressing that soon.
No, that's totally fair. I think that's a great goal as well. I have just like a last two questions. So I really want to know, what's the dream, like the vision for the future of the working group and for open science at Concordia?
That's a great question. You know, Concordia defines itself as the next generation university. And next generation here is the key word, right? So open science is next generation. Open science is the future of research. And this has become very clear. So for example, the government of Canada developed this roadmap to open science, and they envision that all research will be open by design and by default in some years from now. So I think that Concordia can really lead the change in the open science area, and we can be ahead of the curve. Concordia can set a really important precedence in the local context, and I think that's what we need to achieve. And in the open science working group, you know, we have the drive, we have the vision, we have the knowledge, we have the community, which is what matters, right? So now we need to secure the resources that are needed to move forward and take action together. But that's why we are all together here today, right?
Well, that's a fantastic dream, and I'm really happy that we all get to be part of this dream today.
Exactly.
Last question, how do people that are in the community at Concordia and the broader community at Montreal and Canada even can get more information about this working group, how to join it, how to collaborate, other things?
Yeah, so anybody can contact me through my email. I can share that on the chat in a moment. And they can also access our work through their report that is openly available on Spectrum, and I can share a link to that too.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for taking the time to answer my
Thank you so
questions.
much, Andrea.
Give it up for Dr. Alessandroni.
Thank you.
Well, now I also have the distinct pleasure of introducing or asking Malvika Sharan from the Turing Way in the UK to introduce herself and give us her thoughts.
Thank you so much. That was really inspiring. And I have put some slides together because it always helps me to navigate my own thoughts. And I want to first begin by positioning myself, because I think it's important to also acknowledge that my lived experience and realities does affect in the way that I work as a person, as a researcher, as a community builder and open science practitioner. And therefore, the recommendation or insights that I'll be sharing today really comes from the accumulation of all these experiences. So I'm a senior researcher at the Alan Turing Institute in the UK, which is a National Center for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. I am from India. I have lived in Europe for several years, and hence I'm now a European citizen. I'm a UK resident. So I'm very much in a identity crisis of where do I belong, and that kind of reflects in how I advocate for or look at open science practices. I have PhD in bioinformatics. I have really worked with people working with sensitive data to working in the really open of developing software. I've been working in open science community building since 2016. I founded an organization called Open Life Science. Now it's called OLS, which is a training and mentoring program with its main intention to work with marginalized and underrepresented community to participate in open science movement. I'm a co-lead for the project called the Turing Way, which was one of the projects that I presented last year in the Concordia Open Science that Nico and the team had organized. So I also work with other communities. I think it is very much a reflection of how I am attached to different countries. So I'm a fellow in the UK. I work with the Carpentries community of instructors and trainers. I am a panelist for NASA Tops, which is this year's Year of Open Science, and they're really advancing training around that. But I also work with Metadocencia based in Latin America, and thinking about how do we spread funding through Code for Science and Society. So we don't need to define it, but we heard that open science is really understood very differently across different institutions. But I think what we all agree on that it's a collection of different practices, ranging from open access that a lot of people really, really care about, but also encompassing open source, how we develop software, to the infrastructure that we use, the kind of education resource that we have, how we evaluate different kind of research outputs, open data, open lab, and so on. I think Canada is really in the forefront of all of these discussions. One of the references that I continuously use is the recommendation that comes from Canadian Commission, where they frame rights to science as human right, the collective endeavor, which has really enormous amount of respect in terms of common good. But in 2017, they also turned this right into duty that should be exercised by all stakeholders of research, from researchers to educators to policymakers to government, as well as public that are beneficiary and contributors of these research. I also want to frame that open science needs to be taken as a foundational to all research methods. The purpose of open science isn't just openness. The purpose of open science to ensure scientific integrity, quality outcomes, which is achieved by applying reproducible, ethical, collaborative, inclusive design from beginning to end. But often we don't know what we don't know. When you ask someone, do you know about open science? You would often hear, yeah, of course I know. But the more you start talking to them, you realize that our understanding of open science is very limited in terms of publishing paper or probably open source, but that's it. But there is a lot that we can learn and embed that in different work that we do. And that's where kind of the Turing way comes in. I also want to highlight something that the report really, really strongly talks about, that Canada is in the forefront of global issues and the conversation that they are involved in. One of the interesting resource that I learned about recently was Canada's Research Excellence Fund, which has committed over 200 million per year for next 7 years. And some of the references that they use, which was also in the part of recommendation, includes roadmap for open science. It includes all the EDI agenda that the action plan has, as well as the research data management related work, which have really strong connection to the open science. I also want to emphasize that one of the examples that because I work with them, is that if we want to do open science adoption, everybody needs to be part of it. NASA had launched Transform to Open Science last year, but they worked with the White House to get all the other federal funded organizations to come together and commit to doing open science. So there is a role that each organization across the nation plays in order to make the vision for open science a reality. I would like a lot more countries to draw from these kind of investment as well as connection. And I don't want to say that it's just happening in the US, it's just one of the examples that I had in hand. One of the biggest insight I want to share from the recommendation is the Open Science Office, which is just to emphasize that it will build skills and accountability for the vision that the community across Canada is setting. There are a lot of fragmented knowledge and initiative that has been listed in the recommendation. And someone needs to bring that together. Someone needs to build a community, convene them, connect these fragmented knowledge and initiatives, so you can have a more connected effort to advancing open science. But it is also that our world is changing constantly. The way we do research is changing every single day, and our landscape for policies, initiatives, and technology in research is very complex. And someone needs to help organizations to navigate through that. And therefore, other people within organization, researchers, students, and practitioners can adopt them. And it is also important that someone is strategically thinking about skills and capacity building. There is a lot of mention around evolving recognition and incentive system, because this is also the part of complexity, that data science or research is so complex now. It's interdisciplinary, and the way we work, it goes beyond publishing paper or writing a piece of software. It is everything that we do. And therefore, we need to make sure that someone is really advocating for these kind of recognition. This is just a highlight from the Open Science Roadmap, and really put into perspective that the principles include investment in people, transparency, inclusiveness, collaboration, sustainability. And these would happen if we start taking steps now. Sustainability is really about long-term sustenance of people who are involved in this. And of course, all of these that we are talking about goes beyond just the act of opening something. This is really about achieving knowledge equity. One of the things I would also like to recommend, which could be an additionality to the recommendation that we already have, is that, of course, investment is important, but it's also to recognize that there is not just one person sitting in an office and advocating for open science. Everybody needs to share that responsibility for openness. This can happen by diversifying research roles, by recognizing how different people across the ecosystem contribute to openness, where are they involved, where they can connect with each other, as well as how can we evolve the roles that they play. Rather than calling someone just a researcher, can we actually give them responsibility to become community manager or data steward or ethicist? So all of these work are really happening intentionally. Okay, I want to finish with this last slide, which is return on investment. Of course, we are living in economic crisis all around the globe, and the funding where we see the maximum cut is in education. But I think despite that, in open science, investment is needed. All of these ideologies are great, but when we start to implement them, funding are required so people can actually access resources that they need to build that skill. And return on investment is beyond academic institutions, because everything that we as researchers develop affect every part of the sector, benefiting all sectors, stakeholders of our society. This is from 2014 post OECD report, where they talk about how different level of stakeholders, such as researchers, research teams, organizations, decision makers, or funders, general public, as well as the broader economy at the national level, get affected in terms of benefits of open science. So I'm not sure how long I have been talking about, but I would share these slides, and I would be really looking forward to having this conversation with you. And thank you for inviting me again.
Thank you so much, Malvika. That was so interesting. And now we have some time for questions and comments, both from the audience and from the virtual audience. So I'll open up the floor for questions.
If anybody online has questions, just feel free to put them in the chat. And we'll get them into the panelists that way.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Olivier Charbonneau. I'm a librarian. And if I could give you a magic wand to change one single thing in the universe to make open science a reality, what would it be and why?
I've been asked this question and I have always struggled to answer this, but I think one of the things that I strongly believe is that we should work beyond borders. If I had a magic wand, I would really destroy the borders. So people aren't thinking at the local or national level, but they're really thinking internationally and connecting internationally. We are so involved in thinking about how my people benefit that we forget that there are repercussion. But there is also, like, there's joy of sharing knowledge and joy of connecting across different culture and language and experiences. So yeah, if I had the magic wand, that's what I'd do.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm a grad student here, or no, I'm not. I'm a postdoc. My question is about the relationship between diversity, equity, and inclusion and open science. They seem to either be two sides of the same coin or potentially the exact same problem. I wanted to hear your thoughts on how we can leverage that connection to maybe improve the outcomes for both goals.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think it's a little bit of criticism of a wonderful recommendation, is that I definitely believe that equity is synonymous to open science. It's not just an additionality. So if I want to define open science, it wouldn't be that it is also about equity. I would say it is definitely about equity. It is about making things so transparent that all the people involved can see what's happening, get involved, get recognition that they need. So I definitely think that we should not think that equity is a side effect of open science. It's the intention. It's in the heart of it. And I work right now with communities across the globe, and that has happened only because of open science. I would not have any other opportunity to work with them. Also have seen how technology from one part of the world get translated on the other part of the world, because there is a willingness to share that openly with anyone. So yeah, excellent question. You actually did answer the question, so I'm struggling to add anything to that.
Hi, thank you for organizing this. I'm Natalie Phillips. I'm a professor in psychology. So I am struggling with the financial part of open science. So there's lots I feel I can do. I can pre-register my analytic plan. I can post my R code. I actually work with the data from that are archival data. So that's all fine. But then I get to the point where I want to publish it, and the journals want for $5,000 for that article. And CERC grants are, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. That's a lot of money. So, so I think we have there's a second part of the financial challenge. I'm working with a national study of dementia, and we're being asked now by CIHR, we've collected data on 1,100 participants, and it's going to be longitudinal. So we're being asked by CIHR what our plan is for the longevity of those data. We're not funded to do that. That to me is a question for the Tri-Council. So I'm interested in having a discussion on where the Tri-Council is and getting behind us in funding us to actually do this work properly. That's a cranky question, but I think it's an important one.
Not at all a cranky question. That is the reality. I think you've touched two parts. The labor, the burden of labor, because you have to do research, right? Grant, teach people, you know, be the best researcher out there. And like, I'm not even listing half of it. And on the top, worry about finding the funding to do the work properly. I want to just read Joshua's question on the chat because it connects really well. So Joshua says, you talked about the need to spread the responsibility for open science across many people with different roles. Are there certain types of roles that you think haven't been involved but might have a surprising impact if they did get more involved? So I want to respond to the first part, which is the burden of labor. The burden of labor is in terms of one researcher cannot possibly do all of these things. All the things that you said that should be a responsibility of someone dedicated to do that. Obviously, that's not possible because there is lack of funding. You can't have as many experts in your team because there is already researchers who need to find funding for their own role. So I don't really have an answer for you, but I know how many grants that I have to write just to keep a person in my team. And we have definitely managed to get some funding at the institutional level where we can ask people to ask for money to publish openly. And I think that should be the role of libraries where they allocate funding for your publication. But also this week is Open Access Week, where we are talking about community over commercialization, and people are talking about what are community-led, low barrier, low cost publication system that we can uphold rather than worrying about these $5,000, $11,000 to publish our papers. So yeah, I think, Joshua, I didn't respond to your question, but I just have to say, like, it's the question that was asked from the floor is that there are too many things we're asking one researchers to do. And in order to hire more people, we need more money. So it's not an answer. I share the crankiness. It's really annoying.
Well,
just for a second, and regarding what Malvika just said about this event happening right now about open access, there's been discussions about Diamond Open Access, for example, which is an alternative to the current publishing system where there is no APC, right? So what is preventing authors from publishing in Diamond Open Access? Well, probably the prestige of traditional journals, right? That they are assessed by the impact factor, where they're published, etc. So if we could change the incentive structure, we might be able to find a way out of these APCs. And the same applies to other areas such as open data, open code, open labs, etc. Just a thought.
Well, that's time we have for questions. Thank you so much again, Malvika. It was a great talk. And now I have the pleasure to ask Heidi Baumgartner to introduce herself.
Great, thank you. And thanks for the invite to be with you today. I wish I could be in Montreal with all of you, but I'm joining from California. Let me get I also have just a couple slides. Let me get this up. Okay, so I am, I'll start like Malvika did, where I'll introduce myself to give you an idea where I'm coming from. I'm a research scientist at Stanford University, and I am the executive director of a global consortium of developmental psychology labs called Many Babies. I've had the pleasure there of working closely with Nico and Krista Byers-Heinlein, who is a member of our governing board. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm battling a bit of a raspy throat today. And I'm also the co-director of a group we call the Stanford Big Team Science Lab that I co-direct with a colleague, Nicolás, who is the director of a similar large big team science group called the Psychological Science Accelerator, that runs sort of global replications and multi-lab studies across the world. And both of our groups have a big focus on open science as a core part of our mission. I'll just put up here to highlight a couple of things that group has worked on together. We've had a couple publications in recent years looking at challenges that come up from large collaborations that are relevant to the discussion of open science. For instance, how to handle authorship when you have lots of people working together in an open way, and also just how to form and manage these collaborations. So one thing that I thought of when reading the Concordia report is, and it is relevant to some of the questions that just came up after Malvika's statement, is that open science doesn't have to be thought of as an all or nothing proposition. I like to use this analogy that another member of our Many Babies Governing Board, Christina Bergman, came up with a few years ago, and that she calls the buffet approach to open science. So it's a way to recognize that not everyone can do everything all at once, because there is a cost to some of these things in terms of not just money, but also time to do all of those things that were on that great open science figure that Malvika showed. So Christina talks about sort of a few rules that are analogous to how you might approach a buffet. So the first one being, you might not be able to try everything. There might just be too many things on the table, and you might have to pick and choose. And it's okay if you can't try everything at once. You still should, pick a few things and see if you like them. And if you do, you can have some more, or you can try something else. Similarly, you don't have to try everything all at once. You only have so much room on your plate at any given time. So the idea there is that you can start small. You can pick one open science sort of practice, let's say pre-registering a study, and implement that on a project. And then maybe if that works out, maybe on your next project, you pre-register it and you make your code as reproducible as possible. And the idea is that it can be an incremental process that builds on itself, and it doesn't have to be a completely overwhelming thing from the start. And then the last rule she talks about is to label everything. So just like you wouldn't want to show up at a buffet and have a bunch of mystery items that you don't know what is in front of you, documentation, transparency is key to open science. And I know when people talk about, or when people hear, oh, I have to create documentation for everything, it's going to be a bunch of bureaucracy. It can seem like maybe a bunch of busy work that might take you away from what you really want to be doing. But one thing that I hear time and time again and have experienced myself is that complying with a lot of these practices in terms of good documentation, clear annotation of code, is not just to benefit the community and make your data and your materials interpretable to other people. It's actually a gift that you're giving to yourself in the future. I don't know how many times, I have tried to go back and look at something I did a few years ago or even a few months ago and have trouble getting back into the mind space of what I was doing, what I was thinking. And you can save yourself a lot of heartache and trouble by implementing open science practices. Even if you never share anything, even if it's just for your own use, these are good practices that are helpful to individuals and not just the community. It's not just sort of an altruistic process that is taking up time and adding a burden. It's actually a helpful thing as well. So that's the sort of buffet approach to open science. One other thing I wanted to highlight is that there was a lot of talk in the report about, focusing on training and outreach. And I think when people talk about open science, there's a lot of focus on, training the next generation, training up graduate students, early career researchers on these practices. And in my experience, there's a lot of enthusiasm from those groups for open science. They don't take a lot of convincing. The real hurdle, I think, is convincing those who are already established senior faculty, who are the ones who are sitting on hiring, tenure, and promotion committees, and also the ones who are training the graduate students, the postdocs of, the next generation, who are the most resistant to some of these practices. They sometimes think, as I mentioned, that it is more of a hassle than it's worth. And without having those folks on board, it's really hard, even with the enthusiasm of the younger researchers, it's hard to have any type of meaningful, sustainable progress in this area. So one thing I always think about how to do better is to do more of that outreach towards senior faculty so that they can model those behaviors for those they're training, and also use their influence to value these behaviors in terms of hiring, promotion, funding. That's a big one. We've talked about funding. The folks who are sitting on grant panels and reviewing funding requests, the more that we can try and reach those people and convince them of the value of open science, the more that it will help transform the field. We can't just focus on the young folks, because again, I think in my experience, those are the people who are already convinced, but sometimes have a hard time convincing those who are sort of controlling their paychecks and their future that it is in fact a worthwhile and important thing. Yeah, and then the last thing I wanted to mention, again, this also kind of came up in Malvika's comments, is I think just the importance on focusing on sort of collaborations and cooperations across institutions and across organizations, international cooperation. I'm based in the United States, so I'm familiar with groups like the NASA TOPS program and Helios, which is a working group that is focused on, sustainable infrastructure and policy guidelines for open science. And so there's a ton of this work in progress. And I think the more that those groups can sort of practice what they preach and share materials with each other, so that there isn't a bunch of reinventing the wheel, the better off we'll all be. And so, yeah, I think I'll end it there. And thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to hearing any questions and continuing the discussion.
Thank you so much, Heidi. We have time for questions again from the audience and also from our virtual audience.
Hi, thanks so much for that talk. I'm Madison. I'm the lab manager in Krista Byers-Heinlein's lab at Concordia. Going back to the buffet analogy, I was wondering if you could maybe recommend a first pick at the buffet, something that might be an easy entrance into open science for people that are interested in dipping their toes in. Thanks.
Great. And hi, Madison. It's nice to see you. We've had some email correspondence before. Yeah, that's a really good question. So it kind of depends. I think for everybody, it'll be different depending on where their comfort level lies. So if you are, comfortable with using R or another coding platform, and that's how you do your analyses, I would say a great place to start would be to make sure that your code is really well annotated, and to make that available on something like the Open Science Framework as you're finishing up your project. A really easy thing that I think is an attainable thing for everyone is to get in the habit of posting preprints of manuscripts on places like SciArchive. That is a great way to sort of share and disseminate research that's in progress. So you can share, a manuscript that you've submitted for review, and get feedback on it in addition to the peer review that you're getting. It can be a really great way to incorporate feedback and make your manuscript stronger. And then also posting preprints of work that has been accepted for publication. We talked a little bit about the burden of APCs and how that can hinder the open sharing of information. Again, it's obviously we would love for every paper that is published to be fully open access. But if that is not something that's attainable for you, given your funding status and the high burden that APCs can place, posting a preprint on a preprint server is a great way to make your research accessible to everybody. And it really just takes a couple minutes to do. So I would say those are a couple ideas of places to start. And then, you can build up from there.
So I do have a question for Heidi. You talked about building capacity as an important step towards open science, right? So I was wondering, in your opinion, which is the first step that institutions like universities can take to create capacity, to build capacity?
Oh, tough question. Good question. Yeah, I wish I had a good answer to that. But I think, we talked about this just the other day about what a great resource that libraries and librarians can be for the open science process. So I would say I would want every institution to sort of support their library systems and their librarians in helping to come up with open science practices that can be implemented across departments that are not specific to a domain. And also, it's in parallel with that, it's just as important to make the researchers aware that those resources exist. I've heard from so many librarians, and I'm guilty of this too at my own institution, that, they're like, we want to help people with this, and they just don't know about it, or they don't use us enough. We have resources. And so, yeah, I would say both supporting library systems and librarians, and also educating researchers about what already exists and making sure that they're utilizing those services.
Yeah, and I will just take the chance to thank the library at Concordia University for being so supportive and so engaged with all our activities. They've been nothing but wonderful. So yeah, I wanted to recognize that. And actually, I think Rachel wanted to make a comment.
I'm Rachel Harris, the scholarly publishing librarian, one of the several librarians in the room and on the participants list. So thank you, Nico, for organizing this, and thank you, Heidi, for your talk. If anyone wanted to chat about article processing charges, green open access, institutional repositories, and ideas for author rights retention strategies, come chat with me. So my question, Heidi, for you was, it's confusing where to look in the space. Okay, there we go. In terms of specific strategies that you've used to convince the top at your institution, what are some of them that have worked in your case?
I would say it's a work in progress. Yeah, with our network, it's a very self-selecting crowd. You know, we rely on volunteer efforts for pretty much all of our groups. And so the people who are opting in to our community are generally the people who already at least tend to be on the side of pro open science, you know, people like Krista at Concordia, amongst others. So we're working on this. This is something that we're thinking about. But one thing that one of our ways right now is to sort of support and try and provide meaningful experiences to the ECRs and students who come to us without sort of the participation of their advisor, and try to sort of model that this can be a participation in our groups and in the practices that we employ are beneficial in terms of like career progression and contributions to the field. And so, yeah, but we're always open to ideas about, you know, especially from folks who are in those senior faculty roles, about what they're resistant about and how they could be convinced to implement some of these practices in their own labs.
Right. That's the time we have for questions. Thank you again, Heidi, for that inspiring talk. I now have the pleasure of asking Gabriel Pelletier from the Tanenbaum Open Science Institute at the Neuro Montreal to introduce himself.
Hello, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I'm Gabriel. I work nearby at the Montreal Neuro, which is affiliated with McGill University. My role with the Tanenbaum Open Science Institute, TOSI from now on, is to help researchers make their research outputs more open, make everything more open, their work more open, all aligned with open science. That's part of my role. And so to continue with the buffet analogy that Heidi just mentioned, it's sort of, if the small is usually, you know, the plate is usually small or limited for people to put stuff in, my role is to have another plate or like to extend this plate so people can do more open science just because there's staff like me to help them do it. So that's part of what I do and what we do at TOSI. So the purpose one of TOSI is to make the Neuro a sort of a living lab for open science. And that's pretty cool. It's kind of a playground, and there's funding to do it. There's been a big donation from philanthropy from the Tanenbaum Foundation in 2017. And the nature of this donation is it's an endowment. So that's just a technicality, but it makes it a super important difference that we get money every year. So it's sort of a sustainable model. It's not just a big grant that you get once, and then once you run out of it, well, what happens with all of these initiatives that you started, right? So we get some money every year, and we get to try different things, see what works, see what fails, to make this institute as open as possible. That's the purpose one of TOSI. Purpose two, which is super important to what we're discussing here, is to rally other Canadian institutes working in neuroscience in Canada to this open science mission or alliance, as we like to call it. It's sort of a, I don't know, impressive. So there's funding for that too. So we have staff members at TOSI who go talk with other institute leaders institute leaders and I guess open science advocates at these institutions to really sort of enable them to come up with those strategies to get buy-in at the institute. So to talk with other researchers, see what the open science needs are and how they can address that, and eventually come up with open science principles that they get sustained funding from TOSI to continue throughout the years. So that's kind of the background. So I'm kind of in an interesting position where we've tried a bunch of things that are listed in the report, and I can try to speak to that. So I've been working with TOSI for 2 years now, so fairly recently, but I've been doing my PhD at the Neuro, and I've seen this transition while doing my PhD, while the Neuro adopted open science principles, and so I've simmered in this sort of changing, milieu for quite a while. So what I did here is I don't have any slides. Obviously, I have a bunch of notes about the report, so I'll try to go over that. Hopefully, it's not too disorganized, and comment onto like different points that were mentioned there. Right. So first, well, it was sort of divided into different sections, which I liked just for readability. But so it started with community, right? How to bolster an open science community at Concordia. And first thing there was about support grassroots initiatives, which is actually the first thing that we did. Highlight who at the institutes are already open science, friends, and throw money at them or support, so they can grow these initiatives. And it worked. Obviously, it's limited because it affects those that are already, into it. And so, yeah, so we built a sort of a grassroots committee based off of these sort of more open science enthusiastic PIs at the Neuro. And so we meet with them at TOSI every month. Mostly it's sort of a sounding board for what happens. And so these are researchers across the I would say researcher life cycle, but it's kind of bleak, career stage, and across different fields or subfields. So we're in neuroscience, but that's pretty diverse. There's neuroimaging with humans, there's cell work with mice or genetic stuff. So really different data types with different considerations, ethical considerations, technical ones, and so on. So this group really gives us an idea of what goes on into these different subfields of neuroscience at the Neuro, and so we can ask them like, what do you need? What works, what doesn't, and where do you want us to put money? What's most needed? So that's touching up on the grassroots initiative bit. I would add to that, which was not really highlighted in the report, is trainees, which I think we've mentioned it. The young generation are really already agree with open science principles, and so empowering them with a bit of funding and support is something that we've done more recently, but that so far has a huge impact. Like there's a small group of trainees, and we can barely keep up with them. They're just coming with new stuff every week, and we sort of almost have to slow them down. Then the next point was about EDI at the center of open science, which I think it's critical, and Malvika talked to that quite brilliantly. I think that this ties a lot with the next point I'll talk about in the next section, was about changing the incentive structures and recognition, tenure and promotion, evaluation, because most of these changes that we'd like to make that to tenure and promotion procedures that align with open science also open up the possibilities, basically. So it's not just prestige begets more prestige, but it's opening it up to people that do not necessarily align in it, do well in the traditional metrics that we use, which includes open science, but also other stuff. So yeah, speaking of, the next bit was about resources to be allocated for fostering an open science culture at Concordia. And the first point was about, yes, tenure, promotion, evaluation. And I think this is probably the most important bit in all that I will touch upon. And it's tough to change. We've done a little bit of that. So the Neuro is it's an institute that pretty much aligns with a department, which is neurology and neurosurgery, which is within the Faculty of Medicine, which is within McGill University, right? And that's not unique. At Concordia, I'm sure it's a similar structure where researchers can be evaluated and are evaluated at different levels. And so, whereas we at TOSI within the Neuro were able to do something to start changing the evaluation at the department level, which is great, but ultimately for like the more important things like tenure, this goes to the university level, and so guidelines need to come from them for these changes to really be effective at the highest level. And I think Concordia is in a super good position there because you are working at the university level, which I'm kind of envious of, because it's really, really hard for like someone at my level to try to, I don't know, like, make myself seen at the faculty and even the university level to have these things change. And I would say even more at a university level, it needs to change also at the funding agencies level, which is a whole other beast. But your university level is a very good start, I would say. Then what did I wrote here? I can barely read my handwriting. Staffing, yes, you had a point about staffing and the idea of a cluster hire around open science, which I thought was a super good idea. We didn't, do anything like that at the Neuro or McGill, but it would be tremendous because you can actually hire people that not only are, into open science, into their own work, but also are more of a sort of meta sciences angle, or an open science / meta science focus. Is the focus of their work, and that's super useful to get metrics on open science, to actually measure open science, but also general research practices. How are researchers doing at the institute or at the university? And I would say, the university higher ups would like to see numbers, I'm sure, about, if we are going forward with open science changes and putting a bit of money into that, are we getting something out of it, right? Can we show that, let's say, the research practices are becoming more open and papers are more open access and so on and so forth? And so how do you do that? Well, you need some meta science expertise. Of course, the library can do some of that. But having some, research expertise at Concordia would go a long way, I think, for open science. Then the point about having an open science office, which I think Heidi or Malvika or both highlighted, that would be great. And actually TOSI is a little bit of that, pretty much. So we're a little open science office at the Institute doing, what we can. And this is so important to centralize, as what was already mentioned. So the expertise and have this link between all of those doing open science at the university. So there's already a bunch of people, I'm sure, doing open science at Concordia, but without a centralized office to sort of link them together and maybe link them with a colleague that doesn't do their work in such an open way, but could because their work is so similar, or things like that. Yeah. Okay. What else? Oh yes, I think I made a small note here that a lot of the things that I do, like a lot of the time I spend in my work is to actually, try to be up to date with all the open science things that happen out there. And open science is such a moving field. It's kind of overwhelming, but if you don't have people that can actually spend some of their time doing that to keep then the faculty members, up to date with what's going on, and a new database that came out, or a new journal that's now Diamond Open Access, or I don't know, name it. So it's really hard, even for us that are full-time working on open science, to do that. So let alone for those that are just researchers doing a lot of other things. I don't want to speak for too long on things, so I'm going to skip that one and we can come back to it. Foster interdisciplinarity. I think that was great, just to reckon with the fact that there's a lot of differences between fields. Just at the Neuro, working in one field, it's already super varied and it's kind of tough. Because of that, well, it's a challenge. It's a good one, but so I cannot even imagine, like at the university level, all of the differences that the meaning of open science or open scholarship even varies a lot between fields, let alone like the actual actions that you can do to comply to that. So, just thought it was a kudos for pointing it out before, others. And then the next section, which also super good to reckon with, is all the challenges that you highlighted to face open science implementation. And the first one was reservations of individuals, or as we mentioned, maybe older-fashioned faculty members that might not be so much into open science, and to to be honest, I'm a bit surprised by that, but in my 2 years working with PIs, that's not a big issue. I haven't found that really, like, there's a bit of resistance somewhere, but it's like passive resistance more than active, like I'm against this or that. It's just like, because it takes time, it takes money, they're already overwhelmed with things, and so not that big of an issue, I think, which is good news. But maybe that's a more, obviously I'm evolving in an open science institution, so maybe PIs have been, simmering into that for a while, and they kind of agree with it reluctantly, but I didn't find that to be that big of a deal. Then the main issues that you highlight are with, ethical considerations, facing data sharing and sharing materials and other things. That's a really tough one that we're working a lot with. So that touches everyone working with human participants' data, essentially. And there's not, much I can do to help here, except you need to find a way to really be in touch super tightly with the research ethics board. And it's tough because they're overwhelmed with work, at least in the field I work in. And so having them to set some time aside to work with you or with the Open Science Office to come up with guidelines for researchers that wants to share data, what to put in the consent form, how should we share that, and get also, keep up to date with the laws that are constantly changing in Quebec about data privacy and that sort of stuff. So it's really tough. But I guess, yeah, just try to be in touch with the REBs as much as you can. And then the last bit that I noted is IP, so patents versus commercializations versus community. Actually, I like as the theme of this year's Open Science Week is. So I think that was missing a little bit from the report. Like it's mentioned, but it's one of the big contention points when we work with other institutes on the Purpose 2 side of TOSI. So we asked them to come up with open science principles before getting funding from TOSI. And principles are like, we commit to sharing data and code openly as much as possible, having open access papers as much as possible. So all that's pretty easy for people to commit to, or to actually like say they agree with that. But the IP, how do you deal with this, knowledge translation, commercialization issues? Because universities really are, so the patents and the number of patents and the money they make, they think they can make out of patents is really dear to universities. It looks pretty good, like, oh, we had this number of patents coming out this year of university research. And so it's tough to deal with commercialization and contract offices and reconcile that with open science, but it's critical because there needs to be, boundaries and guidelines. So what are you doing with a discovery that you think can be valuable to other people? Is it better to commercialize it so it can be developed much faster with capital money? That's like the traditional way. Or is it better to go an open source way so that others can reuse it, spin it off? And, there's a case to be made on both, but there should at least be a recognition that there are other ways than the classic, that the only traditional patent one, and we could go open. So yeah, I realize I've been talking for a long time. Yeah, so that's all I have to say right now. Yeah, so far.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. That was amazing. So I guess we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Hi, thank you for your talk. Actually, I just wanted to kind of flag the fact that we have a speaker series coming up that addresses evaluating excellence, rethinking academic assessment. So this is a joint initiative from the OVPRGS and the Provost's office, where I think a lot of this conversation can continue. The first speaker in that series is Giovanna Lima, who's coming from Erasmus University in Europe. And her talk is on November 16th here in Fort Space. And a really interesting lineup through the winter. We have Vincent Lavivière, who does a really interesting critique of the of traditional bibliometrics. We'll also have a special session on open access and one on Indigenous knowledges. So that to look forward to.
Nice, thanks for that. While we're plugging things, Vincent Rivière is going to be at the Neuro as well. We're organizing an Open Science and Action Symposium, November 30th. So it's an annual thing, and he's going to be the keynote speaker. We're also really eager to see what he has to say about all of these things that we've been doing. He's a meta scientist looking at research on research. And,
So thank you, Gabriel. A lot of interesting points. And of course, the Neuro has been an exemplary institution when it comes to implementing open science. It's, I think that its commitment to implementing open science publicly, that was a huge thing, and that really helped driving change. So I was wondering if you could expand on that, on the commitment that the Neuro made and how that helped driving change. And also both Malvika and you talked about investment in open science and how worthwhile they are, because then the return is greater than the cost. So can you provide some examples of how that happened at the Neuro? Because you have more experience in this domain than Concordia and other institutions locally.
Yeah, so to touch on your last question before I forget it, some examples of how the benefits, or open science pays for itself, maybe. Yeah, so a lot of the funding that we've been doing and on the neuro side of things is to sort of small-ish grants to labs that already do interesting things, that to sort of open things, but to sort of go to the next level, right? So let's say you're building a pipeline to analyze neuroimaging data, wanting to make it open source. Well, here's a bunch of more money to help you hire some maybe developers to actually test the code so it's robust, to put it online in a reproducible way, and to track versions and all of that stuff. For instance, things that labs are not usually necessarily equipped to do. And so, I mean, this is kind of thing that it's hard to track whether it's, there's no money coming back from that. It's a really sort of community, it's kind of a gift to the community, essentially, in terms of hours of work that other researchers are going to save by reusing this super great pipeline that they were going to build anyway in their lab, spending months because there's nothing available, or money that would have paid for a commercial version that does some of that stuff. So that's, money saved clearly, although not necessarily by, the institution, but worldwide. Where maybe that saves money for institutions directly is where we talk more about databases. So, managing data is quite expensive, especially with larger amount of data. And so some of the things we fund is actually capacity for data storage in a way that's aligned with FAIR principles of findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. So that essentially means that a researcher can put their data there, other researchers can access these data, not necessarily have to collect the same data twice, if basically the same thing that they wanted to do. And also they just don't have to pay for a cloud-based service to host their data from their labs fund, because we've built some capacity to do it. So one example of that is the CBIG repository, which is quite a unique thing in the world really, but it's from the Neuro, and it's the clinical biological imaging genetics repository, something like that. And the idea it's to store data from neurological patients, but patients with neurological diseases, and also healthy controls to be able to compare and make also actual samples like blood samples, cell samples, sort of cataloged there, and for others to request across the world for their own research. All of that with a quite unique framework to deal with the ethics of doing that, getting consent, and the frameworks. And so building that is quite expensive, and it takes a huge number of different expertise, ethics, IT, governance, name it, even like freezers to hold the sample. And so no one could really have built that without funding expressly for such databases. And again, there's no real, we're not making profit off of that. But I feel like it's definitely, pays for itself in a way.
Very
I'm
nice.
not sure what was your first question though.
Yeah, the public commitment, but you kind of answered it.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. And I would like to take the time to thank again all of our speakers. We are now moving on to the hackathon portion of our event, which will not be broadcasted. So thank you to our virtual audience and for all the wonderful questions.
And just so that people online know what we are going to do is we are going to discuss the open science report that we created with the working group. And we are going to prioritize some of the recommendations in the report following a template that actually Monica Malrenan generously shared with us from OVPRGS. So thank you, Monica, for that. So we are building on that template today to come up with a concrete action plan for open science at the university. So that's what we are going to spend the next hour on. So thank you, everybody, for joining us online, and we look forward to further discussions. Thank you.
Very good. We're moving to the other side of the room where we have round tables to discuss the report. I invite you to form groups of,
I know, 5, 6 people.
4 to 5 people.
2 to 4.
And then there will be a moderator per group, and then Nicolás will go around.
We can make 3 groups, I think.
3 groups, okay.
3 groups with the people present, or 3 or 4 groups, as you wish. And we have moderators for each group, so it will be a nice interaction. And there is also coffee, tea, and snacks kindly provided by the library. So thank you for that. They are on the back. So yeah, before moving to the discussion, feel free to grab a coffee and a cookie or something.
Want to kill it all?